I'd like to call the Finance Committee the Tuesday, March 3rd, 2020 meeting to order. I understand there's no oral communications, correct? Okay, so let's do the first action item, review.
I'm sorry, I just need to call roll real quick.
That's right, I forgot, sorry.
No problem. Mayor Fine?
Here.
Councilmember Niz? Here. Chair Tanaka? 3 present.
Okay, so let's do the first action item, which is the review and recommend to council the preliminary operating plan and new municipal fees for the Junior Museum and Zoo. Does staff have a presentation you'd like to go over?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, council members. Kristen O'Kane, Community Services. And I'd like to introduce to my right John Aiken, who's our manager of the Junior Museum and Zoo, and Jasmine LeBlanc, who's our senior management analyst in the Community Services Department. So we are here this evening to present a proposed operating plan for the new Junior Museum and Zoo that is planned to be open in October of this year. Our goal in developing this proposal is to ensure that we're able to provide a safe, welcome, and accessible facility and experience for all of our visitors while maintaining a high standard of animal care for the animals in the zoo. So I'm going to turn the mic over to John, who's going to go ahead with the presentation, and then we can answer any questions.
Good evening, John Aiken, manager of Junior Museum and Zoo. So, as Kristen says, we are reopening in October of 2020. We're very excited. It's a larger facility with more animals, more exhibits, and more services. And so staff is recommending expanding personnel and some non-personnel expenses, and also setting new fees to offset increased costs. We were founded in 1934, and we're dedicated to enriching the lives of children 0 to 11 through hands-on exploration of the natural world. And our mission is to engage a child's curiosity in science and nature. It's going to be an amazing facility. We're going to improve the visitor experience, expand and optimize the space, make science programming scalable for future generations, and we have a focus on inclusion, accessibility, and the highest standards of animal care. The new experiences will be child-led. It's kind of a big thing for us, is making sure that the kids lead the experiences. But it's new and different from the old experience. Kids now are going to go up into the trees, underground, and underwater. Got a raised eyebrow there. That's great. I love it. Yep, there's nets up in the trees that they're going to crawl across, and there's tunnels underground and tunnels underwater and in the root zone. It's really fun. So let's compare the original and the new Junior Museum and Zoo. So if we just focus on the bottom line here, increasing the new Junior Museum and Zoo, the museum space by 68%, the zoo goes up 185%, education space 142%, exhibition area 269%, the number of interactive exhibits 195%, and the number of science play spaces 186%. So it's a big increase. And to manage that, we need staff to make sure that it's done safely and done well. So let's talk about staffing today so that we can talk about new staffing. Currently, we have about 8.75 benefited positions and a total of almost 16 full-time equivalent positions. So most of those are part-time positions. All right, so our proposed staffing recommendations are mostly in animal care and experiences, maintaining the new exhibits, and guest services. And that's largely the ticketed gate, but it's also making sure that people are roaming the facility and keeping kids safe. We're asking for just 1 benefited position and 5.79 part-time positions, so a total of 6.7 FTE. The benefits of these staffing include ensuring visitor services staff are present at the entrance because of the gate, and available to roam the facility, ensuring safety and providing additional customer support, increasing our opening hours by 5%. Currently, we're only open from 1 to 4:30 on Sundays. We'll be open 10 to 5 on Sunday, as well as the other days that we're open. We need to train the zoo animals to facilitate public encounters. This is actually one of the things that will separate us from other children's experiences in the Bay Area and really make it shine. provide floor programs. The idea there is staff bring out objects and curriculum to an exhibit and just expand it so that kids can engage in experiments right there on the floor, and also animal encounters out in the zoo. And then to meet the best-in-class standards for animal care, there is a lot of record keeping, there's a lot of testing to make and sampling to make sure the animals are healthy and safe. And all of this supports future accreditation with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. There are a number of non-personnel budget recommendations that we're also making. In a marketing budget for the JMZ for the first time, a significant marketing budget, and that's because the contract with our visitors has changed. We're now having a ticketed gate where we had a suggested donation in the past. Increased janitorial services for the larger facility, increased veterinary and care and animal food, maintenance of aquatic features rather than hire engineers to do that. We can contract those services out. Maintenance, that's mostly plywood and screws and bolts and all the things that it takes to keep the exhibits in good repair. And then the association memberships, both zoo and museum associations. And then participation in wildlife conservation programs. If you're going to have wild animals and talk to the public about them, you've got to be engaged in wildlife conservation in today's era. Our pricing recommendations are, I want to say, modest. The daily interest ticket is $10, and maybe a better characterization of that is it's friendly. Going from a non-ticketed gate to a ticketed gate is a big change, and so having a friendly price, I think, is an important marketing opportunity for us. We have a discounted ticketed fee of $2. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. A family membership, a resident rate of $110, a family membership non-resident of $145, family plus membership of $185 for residents, and the Family Plus membership of $245 for non-residents. The difference between family membership and Family Plus is more people get access to the museums. You've got more cards for a caretaker or for a family member that may not live with the family grandparent or whatever. All of these admission fees will help us make the museum more sustainable, funding path for the future, as well as cover our operating costs largely in year one. Let's talk a little bit about free and discounted entry programs. When you start charging a ticketed gate, everybody says, well, aren't you going to start limiting who comes? What we know about that in the industry is that there are a lot of barriers to coming, and it's usually not the ticketed gate. And so we've got a broad array of tools in our toolbox to try and get people to use the Junior Museum and Zoo that are not necessarily considering us part of their family life. But in terms of the barrier of admission, we want to continue being a Blue Star Museum and provide free access for families of active military personnel. That's a national program. Museums for All is also a national program operated through the Association of Children's Museums and the Institute for Museum and Library Services. And essentially, it standardizes how people ask for a discounted ticket. So if you have, if you're getting food stamps, you've got a SNAP or an EBT card, all you have to do is present it and you get the discounted rate. All right, next. Price comparisons. We are still the relatively inexpensive ticket in the Bay Area, and I think that is a good strategy to start off with, although we are looking at, I think, in the municipal fee schedule of asking for a range of prices in there as we go. And then our anticipated visitation. This is an important number because our revenues are all based on predicting how many people are going to come. And usually you do that by looking at your prior attendance. But our prior attendance was based on a free place. So we've hired a number of consultants to help us with this. And before we closed, we did a year-long statistically accurate survey, and we know that we had about 184,000 visits that year. So we are projecting a conservative number of just under 140,000 visits for our first year. Our consultants believe that we can make that so long as we market and do the things that are in our plans. This is a ticket sale split between tickets and membership entrances of 66 and 33%. That's about industry standard for the split between the number of members that come in and the people that are buying new tickets that day. The resource impact. I think the bottom line here is the net general fund impact, but you can see the increases in revenues, the increases of staff costs and non-personnel expenses, allocated charges, but really the impact on the net general fund is $62,000 for the first fiscal year. So our impact to the general fund, our cost recovery has been historically between 25 and 30%, which is at the low level per policy. We're going to now shift to a medium level per policy of 50%. We'll open in the second quarter of the fiscal year, so because we have to hire and train staff for the ticketed gate and the experiences. We don't recommend prorating the expense budget because we're going to have all of the expenses in that first year, even though we open in the second quarter. We've looked at a number of alternatives that we've presented 3 other alternatives for discussion and to help you understand what you get for greater costs. First of all is our status quo is, you can see what our current budget is and our current FTE, our recommended option, which is really the meat of what we're talking about here. And then the other alternative is, what if we didn't charge a ticketed gate? What would it cost to operate the new facility and keep it safe and meet all of our objectives for animal care and all of that? It would be about a $2.8 million increase to the general fund. And still have 20.88 FTE. Alternative number 2 is providing a heavier floor program, and the way we designed this is looking at floor program on our busiest days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We could split them out whenever we want, but it was just a great way to calculate it. And that brings us up to an FTE of 28.53 and a 2.275 budget. Thank you. There we go. And alternative number 3 is maximum floor programming, and that's a 2.57. That's floor programming every day of the week, and it's at 32.53 FTE. We also have developed some strategies to address very large crowds because this is going to be shiny and new. And we want to make sure that people have a great experience, because great experiences get more Instagram posts, they get better reviews, and you get a wave of attendance that way. So we'll bring programming outside to entertain guests while they're waiting. We'll redirect crowds to the park and the adjacent playground, which is what we did in the old facility when we reached capacity. We encourage the purchase of prepaid tickets. And we'll consider, as part of that strategy, implementing timed or variable price ticketing to drive people to get an incentive for buying tickets online, and then we'll know how many are coming. We can also do time ticketing, meaning there's an AM ticket or a PM ticket, and that helps us spread crowds out. We could also look at ticket prices being more expensive during our busiest times and less expensive during the weekday, and that will spread crowds out. That's worked very well for some of the other institutions that we've been in touch with. We'll also consider increasing staffing against revenue. This is an important thing because we've purposely wanted to have a lean staff, but I guess a realistic staff. But what happens if we're really busy and we need more staff? What we're suggesting is that we have additional positions that are approved but not funded. And so through the budget process in mid-year, we'll be able to come back and add positions if we need to. And that's, of course, against revenue, because if we're wildly successful, we'll be able to come in and show that we are wildly successful. So our next steps are to draft and seek council direction on donor recognition later this spring. We brought the donor recognition strategy and plan to council earlier, and we need to come back and finalize that. And then staff and friends of the January Museum will develop a new operating agreement, and that will include a framework for evaluating a future possible change in governance. And I think that is our last slide.
So I did want to also mention that we do have some friends of the JMZ board members in the audience. So our co-presidents, Aletha Coleman and Lauren Angelo are here, as well as Steve Emsley. So thank you for coming. So they're here as well to provide support and answer questions.
Great. Well, thank you for your guys' report. Do either of you have questions, comments, motions?
I make comments, yeah.
Okay, please,
Well,
go
I
ahead.
made one already. As I said, I thought it was a very colorful brochure. It'd be interesting to see it with pictures in it. So, is the weather of any consequence? So I remember we had a lot of discussion about a tree net or a net in the trees. The net goes
Over
over
the
the
zoo,
trees,
right.
correct? And I recall that one of the donors was very adamant about that.
That's
So
right.
we have that in place. And that is so that kids can climb safely in the trees, or?
Well, there are actually two things going on there. The net over the zoo protects the birds and animals that are loose in the zoo. And so the idea is that kids are going to go and look for animals underground, underwater, up in the trees, and they could be anywhere, mostly birds. And the tree house that we've also built in the center of the zoo has net tubes. Kids climb out on the net tubes over the zoo and around so that they can experience gravity, feel bravery. What is it like to be an animal that lives in the tree? And so they can relate to the adaptations of these animals.
So there are two nets.
There are two nets. And
Okay, one that they don't climb in. And one
Correct.
that they do climb in.
Correct.
Right.
And in terms of weather, one of the valuable things of having a museum and a zoo is you are an all-weather facility. People come to you when it's rainy because the parks are wet, and people come to you when it's sunny and beautiful because the zoo is a lovely place to be outside.
So, and the netting will get wet or not get wet?
It's made of stainless steel. It will get wet, and it's very durable.
And talk a little about donor recognition and what that's going to, what are you going to be looking for?
So we came to council with a presentation for donor recognition that looked at site recognition, so people that essentially would sponsor an exhibit and have recognition at that exhibit for their generous contributions, people that gave contributions to the capital campaign to build the building, the Peary family, and that was all outlined in a series of locations and ideas. And as we have fleshed out the plans and are actually putting the signs together, now it's time to come back and say, here is what it really looks like. That was a good first step, but this is the exact
And
words
that's
and
going to
locations.
happen fairly soon?
It is.
And how many donors are you going to recognize?
Are we going to answer that?
We have a total of 200.
Yep, sorry. Sorry to put you on the spot, Laura.
Yeah, my name is Lauren Angelo. I'm the president, co-president of the Friends. So we have a total of 250-ish donors. As far as number that will be recognized, we have a donor board for donors who've donated 10,000 and above. And that's probably about 20 to 40 names. And then site recognition for people who've donated 100,000 and above, who've chosen to be recognized in that way, and that list is much smaller.
There'll also be an annual donor board that will change out annually for gifts each year to the general fund.
But isn't there a sign that's going to be out front somewhere?
There
Where's it, what
there
will
is
the
a
sign say
a
that
donor.
says Junior Museum and Zoo? What does that look like?
Well, there are a number of signs. There's one on Middlefield, which was one that we had before that's made out of steel and is brightly colored. It's similar to the one in front of the
It's going to
Children's
stay.
Library. And that's been resited right on Middlefield. And then in the entry portico will be a new marquee sign that says Junior Museum and Zoo. And in that portico is also the donor recognition for the capital campaign that will be on one wall in that entry area.
Because I know that donor recognition is important, and also, once donors see that somebody's name is on there, sometimes they decide to add their name as well.
It's true.
So I'm sure that will happen. I'm fascinated by this. I'm hoping that your revenue really does materialize in such a way that it does balance, because there's, some extra in this, not extraordinary. But I'm going to presume you've talked to the other you've talked to several of the other zoos in here, the ones that are on page 13. And what do they tell you about operating their museum? Theirs is not a zoo, right?
We've
Happy
got,
Hollow is?
we have a number of attractions up there. Children's Discovery Museum is a children's museum
Mm-hmm.
that has now an outdoor play area. Happy Hollow is both a mini theme park for kids with rides
Yeah.
as well as a zoo. Curiosity is probably the closest to comparison to us. They have both animals and science exhibits for young children. The Children's Creativity Museum also has science exhibits for children in San Francisco. And then Children's Fairyland is an outdoor experience in Oakland. We actually have a broader array of data. We're just presenting these because they were the most pertinent.
And you probably had a chance to look at all of them, I'm going to guess.
We did.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think it's a very exciting project. And I'm going to guess you've got a ribbon cutting going in the fall, right?
We have a series of openings planned. So,
series.
yes, and with a big grand opening on October 3rd, because the park improvements will be done, and we want to celebrate all of that for the city, and with a grand opening. But we'll definitely
You'll have
let
to
you
be
know about
ready
that.
with your scissors or something.
And we'd also like to invite you to come and tour the site now, if you would like to, while it's
love
still
to.
under construction. So we'd be
Yeah.
happy to take anyone.
Yeah, I've been looking at it and wondering, I didn't know whether or not it was safe to go in, so, but.
Yeah,
call
it is
one of
with
you
a
and
tour
you'll take
guide,
us
yes.
through.
Wear sturdy
Okay.
shoes, and we'll give you a hard hat.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. Really exciting project, and happy to see this nearing completion. Couple questions and comments. So one, expanding the open hours, great. When I saw, the slightly increased cost, I was just like, But then, as you positioned it, saying it's less than the cost recovery, which is actually going up. I think that's kind of the right strategy for us for many of these kind of cost recovery operations for the public benefit. It's pretty rare that we see in a staff presentation or a staff report, train zoo animals. So kudos on that. And then a couple questions. So one that stood out to me is you were saying under 1 year old is $0. Is that worth segmenting? I mean, it's just like do you know how many 1 year olds visit right now? And is it easy to tell them apart, or should you just say like,
From survey data, we know approximately what percentage of our attendees are under 1 year of age, and it's a small percentage, but it's an important population because they're going to be users when they're 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and all the way till 11. And so we want to get them in the door and have them love us.
you want to get their parents in the door?
Get
and
their
have
parents, exactly.
Okay, fair enough.
So I think it's under 2. Am I reading this wrong?
Actually, it's
0 to 2?
Oh,
actually, it's
this one's-
actually under 1.
This one said
That's
$0, 1 and
Yeah,
younger.
that's 0 to 2, $0. Yeah, it should
This-
say to 1.
This report
That
says
should say
$0, 1 and
1,
younger.
Yeah, 1 and younger.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a typo.
Fair enough. On page 6, I was a little struck. Some of the budgets are expanding, a lot of the staff is expanding, as is the programming, but no additional management. And especially kind of adding, a higher cost recovery component and ticketing. Is management a needed resource, or are you guys doing something else there?
So that's a question we've grappled with as well. And one of the alternatives that we presented could be looked at as a year 2 or 3 expansion. It adds one management position, a management analyst, so that we essentially have a person focusing on the business operations of the institution.
Okay. So maybe in a couple of years, come back and ask for another management position. All right, thank you. And then ticketing, is it physical tickets, or will you be able to do these on an app or
We're
online?
trying to meet our zero waste policy, and we're going to try and walk out with iPads, greet people under the portico, and process all of this right there without any printed tickets. If people want a printed receipt, we can get printed inside for them. The thermal printers, we all know now, are toxic, and want to try and avoid using those kinds of papers as much as we can.
Okay, just a suggestion there, and it kind of leads into my next question. If you are ticketing people with iPads, capture their email, and then, try to hit them up to be a member. And then what does membership mean, actually? So I know you get unlimited visits, and you get some guest passes, depending on your level. What else are they going to be like? It's going to be like a membership party each year, or like an email to them each month?
Memberships are an interesting phenomenon within cultural organizations. At one time, they were seen as a way of sort of finding donors within the community. And what we've learned over the years is that they really aren't, that it's a transactional membership. They're there for a seasonal pass. But it is also an important group to build community, people that get to know you richly and deeply. And so we want to provide membership, special membership hours for them and special membership events. But we also we want to price it such that we don't drive too many people to memberships because your bread and butter is your ticketed gate. And so there's a balancing line. Through association memberships with the children's museums and science and technology centers and zoos, we can also provide access to other institutions, mostly at a national level, but also discounts at a local.
Okay, thank you. I think those were all my questions. And then just one last comment, like if you go for the AZA accreditation, I wish you all the best of luck. And that seems like a probably tough process, but a couple years out after things kind of bake in. Thank you so much.
Eric, can I squeeze one question in? So you talked about the animals. How many are there? And are these pretty common garden variety animals, or are there some really exotic ones?
They're pretty exotic ones. Most of them are fish. We've got a 4,000-gallon aquarium that we're going to have 2,000 African cichlids that are blue and yellow. They're really beautiful and stunning for kids when they're underwater to see these colorful fish. And they're a freshwater fish that are very colorful. But when you walk in, you'll immediately be struck by white African spoonbills, these birds with very funny shaped faces for fishing. Scarlet ibises, which are brilliant scarlet vermilion color, and pink flamingos in the pond. So it's not your
Real
average
ones.
ducks, real flamingos. The spoonbills are hand-raised and the flamingos are hand-raised because we're trying to do a feeding experience where kids can feel the siphoning of the flamingo's bill as they pump through in a cup, and watch spoonbills, move their bills laterally through the water to grab fish and things like that. And we can do feeding experiences with the kids. And then beyond that, we have many of the same animals that we had before: the giant tortoise, rabbits, raccoons, and we've got an old bobcat. In the future, we would like that exhibit to be a lemur exhibit, so we can talk about conservation of those very critically endangered primates.
The old bobcat is stuffed.
We still have a female bobcat that's still alive, and so she's coming back with us. Her name's Thule. She's getting pretty geriatric, but she's happy and doing pretty well. And then one of the more exciting exhibits we're opening is a meerkat exhibit. And meerkats work particularly well in children's museums and zoos because they are diurnal. They're social and live in a colony, and so there's always things going on. They're a great thing to watch.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know what the last one is, but I'll find out.
They're a mongoose from Africa. They have their own television program.
You know so much about it. Thanks.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for you guys' work on this. I'm personally very excited to see this open. When my kids were younger, they loved this. They absolutely loved it. Wanted to go there all the time. Can we turn to page 13 on the slides? So I'm familiar with a few of these, but not all of them. So I've been to Happy Hollow and Discovery Museum in San Jose, but the other ones I don't think I might have been there, but I don't remember enough about them. How are they in terms of size? I mean, I know Happy Hollow is actually way bigger, right, than and I think even with the expanded museum, I think Children's Discovery Museum, unless it's expanded, I think it's pretty big too, right?
They are. They're all larger than we are. Although Children's Fairyland really isn't. But They're not as big as the Oakland Zoo and the San Francisco Zoo, and so we excluded those because of their scale. And what we wanted to learn about these institutions was not only how their membership and ticket price would affect people's choice to come and visit us, but also look at what experiences they offer and how we will fit in that competitive set. And we have a marketing consultant doing work right now that's interviewing some key institutions and understanding their market penetration, because we know how many families have children under the age of 11 in the 3 counties that we serve. And now we want to understand how these institutions penetrate their market so that we can make some predictions about penetration, market penetration.
So it's like Children's Fairyland, is that kind of comparable to our GMC?
In scale it
In
is,
scale, okay.
but not, they don't have animals. And so
Okay.
it's an outlier in that way.
Okay, okay. Because I did wonder, like, is $10 the right price, or could it go higher, or should it go lower? That's the thing I was kind of curious about. So I think if you have, like, if there's a way to have this comparison here about, you know, because I think some people may not know these at all, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. Pricing is
Oh,
an
no, not the
interesting
pricing,
strategy.
more like the scale of it, like maybe square
yeah,
footage
square footage. We
or
can do that.
something, right?
Yeah,
Just-
some way of comparing.
Yeah, unless you've been there personally, but that would be useful.
Okay.
Okay, and then can we turn to page 15, please, on the slides? So on this is comparing 2020, fiscal year 2020 to fiscal year 2021, right? But it's not really a fair comparison because this is in the smaller Cumberland space, right, versus an expanded space, right? If we were to look at these numbers for what it was when it was there before, what would the numbers be like?
It's approximately the same.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and the reason is when we moved to Cumberland, we knew that caring for the animals in a a place that wasn't designed, that was a temporary facility, would be a little bit more challenging. We had to put our own waste system in with pumps and things like that, and so we kept our staffing levels at what they were in the old Junior Museum.
I see, okay. And I know that in the Art Center, you guys have started doing Net Promoter Scores, which I think is a great initiative. Have you guys done something similar here in terms of like trying to see, you know, what are people's thoughts about?
Yes, we do surveys of guests all the time, and I think within CSD we're trying to standardize some of those scorings so that we can compare across facilities.
Because I do know that when I went to some of those other places, they often would ask that question, and perhaps that's one way to calibrate, you know, how in terms of ticket pricing, how we should be, and also what things are interesting, right? Some sort of feedback mechanism. But I think you guys are taking that initiative, so I think that's great. And then, do you guys know the breakdown of resident versus non-resident attending?
Yes, in 2017, the year before we closed, we had about 20% of our overall attendance were Palo Alto residents.
20%? Okay.
Is that low or high?
It's surprisingly low for a facility that's located, right in the heart of the community, but I think it reflects the number of children in Palo Alto. There's a decreasing number of children in Palo Alto, or I should say they're not increasing at the rate that they are in the other counties. And so what it taught us also is that we are a facility that serves a broader audience that Palo Alto is very proud of, and we serve Palo Alto residents, but we don't only serve Palo Alto residents.
Okay. And
So we're really, doing a great service for the communities around us, yeah.
and then how did you guys decide on the new open hours? Was there some sort of survey, or what was it driven by in terms of figuring out?
Actually, it was driven by people asking, are you going to be open more on Sundays?
Okay.
And we wanted to respond to that. We didn't want to look at broadening our hours, say, in the summertime yet. I'd love to look at that at some point, but until we have a baseline of attendance to kind of make a stab at that we know we can do a fiscally sound way, then I think we'll hold off on that. But this, I think, is a response to what people are asking for.
Were you guys pretty methodical about it in terms of like recording when people asked, or is it just more ad hoc type of?
It was both ad hoc and in our visitor surveys. When we asked people if they wanted more hours, they often cited Sundays.
Okay. Because I think open hours actually like would do a lot in terms of your revenue. Because if you get the right open hours, you can really, and also if you have more open hours, you spread people apart. You could actually have more. Because you guys have a relatively high fixed cost, and then but this opening, the cost is not as high. I mean, there's cleaning and maintenance, but it's really not that high compared to the overall fixed cost. Your variable cost isn't bad. So in some ways, being open more is better because it spreads your costs across more hours, right? And it also increases the revenue potentially. So anyways, that's something I've been looking at when I was looking at this, is whether we should try to leverage the fact that we have a high fixed cost base and try to open more. But again, it has to be when people want to be there. So
I think it's a great idea, and I think it's something that we should look at for year 2 or 3, because I do think that especially families with very young children are looking for things to do early in the morning.
But I would say that, I mean, that's what I was thinking too, like something earlier in the morning. But the other thing I was thinking is, when you're going to get this initial rush because this is a shiny new object, right, in Palo Alto. But if like people try to go there and it's like packed and it's just, because I remember when the children's library opened, right, it was just like a total zoo, right? It's just really, really hard to get in there, right? And sometimes you'd be like, oh man, it's hard to find parking, it's hard, you know. So maybe actually being open like from the get-go might be better, because you have a couple of chances at people to go there. Like if it gets a reputation of, man, this thing's just really hard to get, go to, people just go for something else, right? So I don't know. I think being open earlier, especially with the fixed cost thing, because then it's just you just need a few more part-time people, part-time greeters to help, and you're not really increasing the base, the fixed cost, right? The benefited positions, right? So, anyways, I just think that might be better.
Okay, we can certainly look into that and see what
Yeah.
might be appropriate.
The second thing that I was thinking about is, I like how you guys have like a resident and non-resident fee for the annual family memberships. So that seems to make sense, right? And I saw your comment in the report about having the daily entrance ticket that's kind of the same for everyone. And, given that we only have 20% Palo Alto residents, right, why not? And I was looking at your, that's why I was curious about the comparables, right? This is going to be a new museum, right? Why not bump it up a little bit for non-residents and keep it the same for residents, right? And then try to have more open hours. And because I think also, this is, of course, there's a lot of donations that funded this, but the city's also funding it. People's taxpayer dollars are funding it. And so all the residents are in some ways funding this asset, this benefit, right? But it seems like, and I think, and again, like you said, I think most of the memberships is the exception. It's not the rule. Most people are going to be doing the daily membership. And so to me, I would like to see, kind of like as you guys did, between resident and non-resident, something similar on a daily entrance ticket, right? Either bumping it up or bumping this down, just so that there's some sort of delta, versus keeping the same. Because to me, it has to do with a little bit about fairness in terms of, because like for our programs, residents pay less than non-residents. And so to me, it seems a little bit, unfair.
We shared your concerns. As we looked at this, we want to provide residents access at a premium. But our challenge is with ticketed gates, the speed with which you can move people through that line makes or breaks a great visitor experience. And when you have to geolocate or pull out IDs and prove residency, it slows things down. And so I think there are things that we could do to provide tickets to residents to encourage.
Well, maybe let the resident buy
memberships.
it. Maybe let them buy it online at a discount, right? So you don't have to do it at the
idea.
gate, right? Maybe you can't buy discount tickets at
You can
the
use Fandango.
Fandango. Yeah, I think you use Fandango, right?
So a resident online rate.
Yeah,
that's
so
actually
that
interesting,
we provide that kind of delta, so that people realize that the taxes that they pay go towards some sort of benefit, right? So anyway, so I'd like to see some sort of gap there. And then the other kind of thing, and it's kind of what Mayor Fine just brought up, which is, you know, I was looking at the other comparison you had here, which was for on page 13 about the, you know, Career Odyssey, the Cemetery one, which is there's a delta between child and adult. I mean, I think $0 for one and younger makes a lot of sense. I think that's a really good strategy, but I mean, I know you're trying to simplify the purchasing process, but it would strike me that you could probably charge a little bit more for adults and a little bit less for the kids, right? And so have like some sort of graduated thing. I guess this one I don't feel as strongly about versus resident versus non-resident, but to me it seems like, you know, because like you can think of, as a parent, you may, you know, you bring your two kids there, right? And it's one parent, right? So your parent pays a little bit more, because it's really meant for the kids, not meant for a bunch of adults to be there, right? It's really meant for the kids. So why not have lower fees for the kids and bump it up a little bit for the adults?
Yep, part of it is keeping that line moving and not having to say, how old is this child? How old is this child? And then doing different tickets there, it just slows things down. But also it's a trend in children's museums that people that attend those museums actually are responding very positively to it because it helps them just understand, they just count the noses and this is what it's going to cost.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you guys did more research than I, and it's been a while since I've attended some of these myself personally, but I'm just thinking of like as a parent, right? Sometimes, you know, it starts to add up, right, in terms of the cost. So having something a little bit lower for the kids, which is what it's meant for, might be better. But yeah, okay. So those are my thoughts, and we're at the time now where we're looking for motions from anyone.
Council,
Oh, sure.
could I just add on the ticket pricing? We really have looked at a huge range of ticket prices to try to figure out what's the right starting point. And as we talked about in the memo, part of what we'd like to do is provide include a range of prices in the muni fee schedule so that we can really kind of gauge what the reaction is. If we're wrong and we're not getting a huge amount of attendance, we don't want to have that $12 non-resident rate. But if we are seeing that, this could be one of the strategies that we employ with potentially variable rate or timed rate pricing is also differentiating.
Yeah, I know. I'm with you on needing flexibility in pricing. So I think that makes sense. My point is not so much fixed on the pricing, because I think you have to do whatever the market demands. My point is more about a delta between the resident and non. I mean, very much as you did the membership fees, right? And I'm sure a lot of these other cities do the same thing. So more of providing that kind of delta. And again, we're only talking about 20% Palo Alto, so it shouldn't be that big of a deal in general. And I think it would show thanks to our taxpayers that live here for supporting this project, right? Which I think the city's putting quite a bit of money into this project, so I think we should show some gratitude. So that's where I'm coming from. Not so much with I'm with you on the pricing, right?
Unless you two want to add to this, I would move the staff recommendation, which is we review and commend to the council the report's proposed operating plan for the museum zoo and the junior museum and zoo, and include the recommended staffing complement and cost recovery levels.
Does the maker want to speak to your motion?
I think we've spoken to it. There was only one other thing that I wanted to mention, because on page 3 of the packet for tonight, you talked about this was designed to accommodate people of all abilities. And I think that's really important. And I also hope you're going to let adults climb in those trees.
We are.
Does the seconder want to say a few words?
Sure, thank you for bringing this. Seems like a good plan to start. I would somewhat disagree with the chair in terms of keeping pricing simple to start, but give yourselves the flexibility to change it as needed. But you guys are the experts, and you'll figure that out. Thank you.
So, yeah, I mean, I kind of gave my, I think the only one to me the three that I think are ones that we should think about for the staff recommendation is more open hours. So I'd love to get feedback from you guys in terms of, the GMZ is characterized, if you look at how it's set up, by a large fixed cost, and more open hours it has, the more chance for revenue. And,
We're not quite fixed.
well,
You're going to have to bring extra people.
we have
Labor
to,
costs too.
we have to have labor costs, but that's just mainly greeters. So we could have a slight increase in greeters with relatively, I think it gives the museums, well, I guess what I was thinking is maybe, like, I think, I forgot who mentioned it, but maybe having more opening hours in the morning, as an example, right? So that we could try to capture more of the families that are looking for, things for the kids, right?
I think on this, like, the staff will figure that out. They want this to capture as many, residents and visitors as possible. And I think we're still far away enough from the opening that, we could say 7 a.m. or 6 p.m. and it's like, we're kind of shooting
Well, I
in the
don't
dark.
think we should be prescriptive, but I guess I was more just encouragement that to kind of push that direction, because I think it just makes it more viable.
Why don't we
Right.
get it up and moving? And then you can tell us, whether or not, as a young mother, I wasn't dying to go to the zoo at 8 a.m., so, but.
But your kids are.
Well, maybe, but, that wouldn't appeal to me, but as you're saying, some kids have been up since 5 a.m. and they're just dying to go. So, but I think you're going to find that out, and it probably won't take too long before people will say, wish you were open earlier or later or
Yeah,
whatever.
but we're making a recommendation of the operating plan. So I guess what I'd like to try to see is just like allow them to have the flexibility to go a little bit upwards on the budget in exchange for upwards on the opening hours. So they have that flexibility. If it makes sense, they can do it. If it doesn't make sense, they don't have to do it. That's what I'm saying, because we're trying to approve their
You're
operating.
trying to put it in the motion?
Yeah, just.
Let me look at Kylie.
Okay.
Can you say that one more time for me? The intent of it?
So the intent is this.
Flexibility.
Yeah, flexibility. I would like to give the staff the flexibility to go for more open hours in exchange for slightly higher operating cost, especially in terms of operating cost, to be more specific on the greeter positions, right? So maybe half a head or whatever it takes to actually have that, to actually have the ability to actually open a little bit longer. And the rationale for that is that a lot of it is fixed cost, the animals, the upkeep, whatever. And by opening it more, we give the zoo a better chance to get more revenue, more families kind of hooked on this. And because I kind of want this program to be financially very successful, and so I think, and also like I've been to some things, and that's why I think it's really important to do it early on versus later, is because this is going to be you're going to rush for people, and I think being open more now versus like figuring out like 2 years from now when it's kind of the shine has kind of worn off, I think is important, because this will get families used to going to here. And if it finds out they don't have, they goes retract, oils kind of contract and not do the additional budget needed, right? And they could contract hours. But I think trying to get that right early on, as expanded hours, I think would be a good thing.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, could you repeat the amendment, how it would read in the motion?
Okay, I have to be really specific. So I'm thinking
Well,
like.
I think, well, the reason I asked that question is, quite frankly, the recommendation or the motion that's on the table doesn't restrict our ability to make adjustments as necessary within the broad parameters of the fee system. So I actually don't think it's necessary for you to specify hours as a particular variable in order for staff to have that flexibility that you're suggesting.
So on page 5, you have a table of, number of positions, right, which I think constrain, and then you also have kind of a budget on page 9 that says this is what we're planning to do. And what I'm trying to say, and it's not that usual where I'm trying to give money to staff here, right? So I'm trying to understand the pushback here, but I mean, what I'm trying to say is give a little bit more part-time budget so that the museum could be open longer to get more, if it makes sense, right? If it doesn't make sense, then don't do it, right? And so I would think staff would like that flexibility. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I would.
I think though what the city manager has said will be included in what our discussion is and in the minutes. And I think that they can extrapolate from that if it turns out that they do need to expand the hours.
Well, they need to expand the budget too, then.
And just to be clear, you're not approving a budget tonight,
Right.
so that will come back to the committee and the council as a part of the
Okay,
proposed
well,
budget for their
It's not approving
committee.
the budget, it's not really clear, actually, what we're approving from the written motion here. Because the plan, I thought the plan was the number of people and the budget, but if we're not doing that, then I don't know what we're doing then.
It is the plan in terms of the structure and the basic fee outline as described.
Oh, is it just the fee outline? So basically, the budget that's listed as part of the staff report on page 9 is not part of the plan, is that what you're saying?
So what we're asking for is the staffing as well as the ticket price.
Okay, well then if
Those
it's
are the two
staffing, then I
things.
would say we should have a bit of flexibility on the part-time, especially guest service experiences, so that, so if you guys do need to open longer, you guys have the ability to do so, that's what I'm saying. Right? And so just to me, just so that when you guys open, you have a rush of people, you could actually capitalize on it, right? Yeah. So, I don't know, I mean.
Understood, understood.
This is flexible enough. They're gonna adjust if they see.
No, they don't, because he says that this is the recommendation.
Well, this is the recommendation. It's still gonna go to council.
Well, either
And-
we make a
and I mean-
recommendation or like we.
Well, we're making a recommendation, which I think is like already quite a large change, in that we're going from a free museum to a $10 per visitor museum, right? And we are increasing staffing by, was like 5 or 6 FTE equivalents, right? FTEs. I think that's already pretty significant, and I really do trust staff to shift that and expand it or decrease it as needed according to kind of the demand you see. I mean, the one thing that interested me is their projection for, next fiscal year's attendance is 75% of what it was previously. I think that's prudent. I have no idea if that's actually like the right number, and we'll see with time, right? And like we just are kind of at this point where we don't know. So
I have no doubt that if this is a wild success
They
and
will
people are
come back
hanging,
to us.
out the doors, that you'll come to us and say, we need to expand this.
You'll see
And
Kylie and I as greeters at the gate.
And also, the city manager has the ability to adjust that within certain parameters too. So invite him over for a 7 a.m. opening.
Okay.
ask me to climb a tree.
Okay,
What
well,
time do you intend to open on the weekends?
10 to 5. 10 to 5 is our
So that
hours.
would be the first area I would look at.
I think you're right, yeah.
I think during the week, maybe, but
no, I
weekends.
think you're right, yeah. No, I
Yeah.
agree with you on that.
I could certainly see that people would want to be there by 9 or so.
Okay, well, given that there's not support to give extra heads, fine, I'll drop it. But,
I think it's inherent, though, in that discussion.
okay. The second thing is on the fee schedule. So that's the other thing we're approving, right? Is the fee schedule. So, to what I said earlier, I think there should be a delta between resident and non-resident for the daily entrance ticket. So, looking through the maker.
You
second
think
one.
it should be more?
No, I don't care if it's more or less, but there should be a delta. There should be a difference between resident and non-resident for daily entrance ticket. Like we did for everything else.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's find out why there isn't.
Oh, sure.
Well, as John said earlier, it's really to make the entry point smooth and quick and not have to turn people away if they don't have proof of residency. It's
then-
just to make the process quick and easy.
And
But
I
if
think we
I
talked
might
about- sorry.
Suggest,
Actually, wait, so I think you missed, it, but then we talked about that, and then I think the idea would be to maybe do it online, so people could do that online. They could get that discount online if they had to.
No, I thought you were talking about the delta between resident and non-resident.
Yeah. So we had the discussion just a few minutes ago about, this causes a delay at the entrance, right? And so to overcome that, you could do something online so that people could still get that discount, right?
and I believe staff committed to look into that.
Tell me again what you want to change.
Oh, basically having a delta between, having a resident, having a different price between resident and non-resident for the daily entrance ticket. for the first one?
I don't see any great need to change it. If it's burning a hole in your pocket or your packet, then I guess we could do, but I don't see why it's absolutely necessary.
I think it's really to give our taxpayers,
To give them the first choice and to make it easier?
to basically give them a benefit for having supported this project.
I have no objection to it, but I'd like to hear some spirited support for it.
Okay. Well, I've talked about it already, but, so I think this has been funded through donations and taxpayers. And we have a delta already for just about everything else in the city. We could give it an art program, even the annual
No,
membership.
I understand what you're
And
saying.
most other cities
Yeah.
do the same thing
You
too,
just, you
so-
want to reward our
Yeah,
loyal
exactly.
constituency, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
And the question is, how do you go about doing it?
just jumping
That's our
in, like
question.
staff one has the ability to do that if needed. Two, if we're giving a discount to residents, that just means less revenue coming in for the program. On the other hand, if we increase the prices for out-of-town visitors, it means less demand and again, less revenue. So then we're just shifting it back to residents again. Right, we're literally just shifting that subsidy back to
So-
residents.
Right, so what we said before, though, was your bread and butter is the people coming in every day and on a regular basis and at the same amount. And that means, you know what, let's leave it the way it is. Truly.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you guys don't support it, you don't support it. But I guess to me,
I was convinced by the argument the first time. Not
Uh,
yours, his.
oh, yeah, okay, okay. Well, just to kind of address what you're saying, right? That means with the argument, then we should just have one fee for everyone, for everything then, if that argument holds.
No, because if you're buying a membership, you're actually investing in a longer term, more visits, right? And part of the idea there is you'll be a repeat user, so we can count on your loyalty, and two, you're prepaying for services across a year, right? So in that case, like, there is an argument to be made, like, we'll give you a discount because you're purchasing 10 passes.
But why
right?
should a resident get a discount versus non-resident?
Because then we're saying, like, we would rather have residents do it, and this is also getting to the 2080 thing, which really struck me, actually, right? Only 20% of the visitors here are residents. Did we have passes beforehand, or annual passes
There's no
beforehand?
fee.
There's no fee, that's okay, that's right. So if we assume a similar split, right, then we're trying to actually up residential turnout here by giving them a discount on the membership. And I think that's actually obtaining the same goal you want, which is like, hey, we want residents to use this facility, right? And you can do that by reducing the price.
No, the point is, I mean, we want the residents to use the facility. I think that the point here is to give, is to say thanks to our residents for supporting this. That's
So,
what
I mean,
we're trying to say.
what's the full cost of a visit? Do we know that? I mean, if it's a 30 to 50% recovery, right, I'm guessing a full cost is like $20.
It's about 26, I think,
Right.
yeah.
We're already giving a $16 discount to residents and other visitors.
And non-residents.
Yes, and non-residents, come
Okay,
here
guys.
and they will buy things in the museum
I'm not
store.
gonna win the argument here,
Yeah.
so I'm outvoted. So let's take the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
I'll support. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so next item is,
Thank you all.
yeah, thank you guys. Next item is utilities. Does staff have, are there any speaker cards? Okay. So, given that there's no members of the public, does staff have a presentation you guys want to go over?
Yes.
Okay.
Good evening, Chair Tanaka, Councilman Nis, and also Mayor Fine. So, as all of you know, it's pretty unique. Palo Alto Utilities Department is unique among municipalities in California by providing 5 different utilities: electric, fiber, gas, sewer, and water. Utility Department provides safe, reliable, and sustainable services to our customers. And the department is comprised of 5 divisions: administration, customer service, engineering, operations, and resource management. Together, the men and women keep the utilities in Palo Alto safe and sustainable. So a little bit as I mentioned last night at the CIP presentation portion, the cost of the safe, reliable system has been increasing in construction costs. We've seen this probably somewhere anywhere from double to triple in the last 10 years. And like many of the utilities, we're recognizing that the need for more of investments in our CIPs due to as our assets are starting to come to the end of the life. And we are looking at cost increases that have led upward pressures on our customers' bills, and we're pushing ourselves to do more and control these costs. And this is one of the most priorities that we are pushing forward to as a group in the utilities. Some of the things we've achieved recently is that, it was last year that we were able to do this, is that we were able to do a prepaid deal with saving about $1 million in our gas funds. And then we're advocating through our CPUC and our federal energy regulatory commissions throughout the business partners to hold down those rate increases. And through all of this, we want to continue to enhance our sustainability services that we provide. And we're looking for ways to maintain our low carbon electric supply and to do it at the lowest cost that we can provide. We're also working on how we can step up our support to the community sustainability goals, including vehicle building electrifications, and then also on the hardening of our grid, and focusing on the most effective ways to achieve the biggest carbon reductions. This is the most important focus that we'll have for the most coming years. So tonight, staff is going to walk you through a presentation that we have for our preliminary rate increases. We made this presentation to the UAC back in December 4th. And tonight we have with us Lisa Belair, Acting Senior Resource Planner, Eric Hennessy, which is our Rates Manager, and Jonathan Abenschein, our Assistant Director for our Resource Planning. So with that, we will start walking through our presentation.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. So tonight, we're bringing to you the four funds: electric, gas, water, and wastewater collection. We also show a quick refuse rate projection as information only. And as Dean mentioned, and I'd like to reiterate, the big message that we have and the overriding theme that you'll see through most of these funds is aging infrastructure. And that is really driving up the costs in almost all of the funds. So we normally do this chart. It's a rate projection for residential. We've changed it up a little bit this year to show not only the percentage rate increases that we're looking at, but also the dollar impact for a median customer. So last year we were looking at almost a $14 per month increase and about a 5% overall bill change. This year we're looking at something closer to a $6 a monthly change, but a 2% overall increase. And going forward, about 3% overall bill increases for the next 4 to 5 years.
Just a really quick comment. I was looking at this chart in the packet. It took me a while to get, but I did get it. It makes a lot of sense in terms of the actual utility and what the cost is increasing for that resource. It would also be super helpful to understand, like, across the median, what are the different buckets of a certain bill.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. So also I'd like to bring to you, here's a chart showing what historically, going back to 2011, what the median bill changes have been. So you can see since 2016, we've had some very large overall bill increases, around, anywhere between 10 to as high as $25 in FY 2017. But for the next 5 years, we're looking at something much less. So better news than what we've had in the past. Again, as Dean mentioned, we're always looking at ongoing cost containment, so consistent with the utility strategic plan. We've been asking for cost projections earlier, cycling them through the rates model, showing managers what the impacts of those cost projections would be, and then getting feedback and iterating so we can try and pare down where possible. We also look at ongoing management review of personnel actions and regular review of performance metrics and expenditures. We have 2 slides here of cost containment examples. This one here are some measures that have been taken in the past. as well as areas that we're currently working on and for future exploration. And with that, I'm going to launch into the electric utility. So in electric, we've, again, the aging infrastructure message goes not just here, but across statewide as well, both in, region. So we also, but we do have some good news. Our renewable projects that we've been going for our power supply have all come online, so we don't perceive any cost increases on that side. And the better than average hydro conditions that we had last year resulted in some short-term one-time surpluses in revenue and lower purchase costs, so that's helped refill our reserve positions. Because of that, we're looking at starting back the repayment of a $10 million loan we took from the Electric Special Projects Reserve back in 2018. We'd like to do that in 2 installments of $5 million each, and we'd also like to put some money into the Hydro Stabilization Reserve because we know dry times are coming again. As to the electric cost structure, we run about 40% as distribution-related costs and about 60% is related to supply-related cost. That bottom piece of pie, 15% for transmission, is what we've been noticing. That, again, is the aging infrastructure for the state. That's the piece of pie that we've seen growing the fastest over the several years, and what we're projecting will be increasing faster going forward. Again, I reiterated most of this about supply cost drivers. With distribution costs, and much of what you see on this slide will be carried forward across all the utilities, rising salary and benefit costs, increasing capital investment needs, the higher costs we've seen for underground construction. But one of the things that we also have in the electric side is staffing issues. And getting full staffing has been difficult, so we are seeing the need. We're going to be going out and hiring contract crews to start doing some of the distribution and capital work that we need to be performing, and that does come at a premium cost. Again, 2% rate increase, much lower than what we've seen, especially over the last 4 years. It's roughly split between CIP investment costs and operation cost increases. A little bit for electric supply costs. 2 pieces of pie. One thing here I'd like to say is that we have been seeing load losses. Anywhere from between 1.5% to 2% of our load is decreasing, mainly in the commercial sector. Not that businesses are leaving, it's just that we've seen a change in the nature of businesses' operations. Helping offset, again, some of that, though, is the fact that we had good short-term, one-time hydro conditions, so that helped offset some of the cost increases we've been seeing.
Sorry, what is load loss again?
Load loss, that's the decrease in customer sales that we've been seeing over time. And
Let's let him get through,
yeah.
but then I have more questions on that.
Actually, why don't we just do that now? I mean, I think it's better to ask questions for both of you guys. Just go ahead. I think as you go, right?
You're the chair, you get to call.
No, please, go ahead. I actually prefer that.
So talk a little more about that, about what's changing in the usage, and just talk about it a bit, and then I'll get where I'm going.
So
Because you're saying there's a difference in usage, correct?
there is a difference in usage. So our medium, what we've seen is our medium commercial sector. The number of customers is not decreasing, but
It's
people
not decreasing,
no,
but-
people are moving. Businesses may be moving out, new businesses moving in, but the nature of the businesses moving in are no longer of that quote light industrial nature. They're more office space in usage, and that also means lower loads, more efficient, lighting. Yeah, that's sort of
Which
what we're
is
seeing.
desirable. I mean,
It's desirable, but
but
it also
you're
means that we're
saying
seeing.
when the cost comes down, though, you have to compensate for that.
Well, when the costs are increasing, but the amount of KWH that we're selling on a monthly or annual basis is decreasing, then the prices end up going up to, the price per
Right,
unit
right.
needs to go up to recover.
Yeah.
Councilmember, I think a good anecdotal example is the HP data. HP had a data center in Palo Alto for a while, and just in the last couple of years, they moved it down to Santa Clara. HP is still in Palo Alto, but their data center isn't, and so the load's decreased. It's that kind of a shift sometimes, that kind of a shift.
Do you know why they moved it?
I do not.
If we're saying things like that, though, it's good for us to be analyzing why some of these changes are taking place.
I can speak to the data center itself. I'm sorry to interrupt your train of thought, but
I think we need to understand what's happening within the community, especially within the business community, because there's a very direct correlation between what's going on there and what we're using and discussing here.
so what we hear anecdotally from our key accounts is that price per square foot for commercial space it's at a premium in Palo Alto, and so it makes more sense to move industrial or data center uses down to a place like Santa Clara, where you have more of an industrial park atmosphere, and the costs are not at a premium. The other element of it is the commute times. It can be really hard to get employees, especially for manufacturing uses into Palo Alto. So those are some of the factors that we've been hearing.
One, perhaps I would just add, if I might, and I think in the context of rates, Councilmember Niss, as you're perhaps alluding to, sales are lower, our fixed costs at least, our system costs have not changed, therefore costs are spread among the remaining users. So if, in effect, rates go up for everyone else.
It's the same argument we had to use with water before, Why when you're using less, why did your rates go up? And that's hard for people to understand. But also, what we're hearing is that there are some real changes taking place in how businesses are functioning in Palo Alto. And I think we need to be aware of those.
So just to go on Councilmember Niss's question, so what is the electricity rate difference between us and Santa Clara, where HP moved their data center?
Good question, yeah.
I don't have those numbers in front of me. I will look them up and see if I can find them.
Okay, because for data centers, the majority cost is actually electricity. That's like, it dwarfs everything. It dwarfs labor, it dwarfs like real estate, the cost of the components themselves. It's all about electricity. So generally, data centers are located where it's cheaper electricity. So that's why I'm curious, because it would be really weird if they moved it from here, which if it's cheaper here, to a place where it's more expensive. That would not make sense. So that's why I was curious, what the rate difference is, because like data centers are all about electricity power.
Right.
That's it. That's like majority cost.
So Palo Alto and Santa Clara have been competitive historically. Palo Alto's always been a little bit higher than Santa Clara.
But why though? Because we don't own utilities, right? And they do too, right?
I'm sorry, why
we
are we
have
competitive?
No, why would we be higher?
Some of it has to do with actually, and I'll try not to get too esoteric, but some of it has to do with the just sheer density of industrial uses in Santa Clara. Santa Clara has, Palo Alto has a pretty substantial commercial base relative to other cities, but Santa Clara has an even higher commercial base, and a lot of a lot of industrial and data center uses, and that contributes to keeping the electric rates low. Some of the other factors is that up until a couple of years ago, they were still using coal. There are a lot of things that Palo Alto does on the sustainability front that Santa Clara doesn't do. So there are a range of factors there.
Okay.
But we had historically stayed pretty competitive with them.
Just so, did we able to look it up with the
Yeah, in-town generation as well.
what the price differences are between the two?
I'm trying to.
Still doing it now.
Yes.
Okay. Let's move on while you look
Why
it up.
don't you let me look it up?
Okay.
And, you can continue the
Sure,
conversation.
just
We'll come back to it.
one or two on the electrification. So one, the $10 million electric loan being repaid, can you remind us what that's for?
We pulled out,
Fund.
in 2018, our reserves were particularly low. Our operations reserves were going to drop below minimum levels. So we used that as a short-term fill to help
Okay.
us through.
And so now rates are somewhat being driven by the repayment of that to the special reserve.
Well, no, that's why we're in, you can see on this chart right here, we've had in FY19, our revenues were much higher than expenses and projected to get that. So we're using the surplus that we had from the hydro to help
Pay this
Pay
down.
this back.
Pay this down the opposite. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So while you're looking that up, I just was looking at the slide here. So if we actually took the transfers off, so this is a transfer to the general fund, right? Or what is the transfer?
Yes, that would be transferred to general fund, correct?
Okay. So if we didn't have that transfer, we may not need that rate increase. We took it away, right? In fact, we could do a rate decrease, right?
If it, if we didn't have it, then yes, that would not be a cost that we would face, and the rates could come down if that was no longer there.
Okay. Sorry, why don't you guys keep going? But
Okay,
I'd love to know the answer to the question. Santa Clara, what is the rate of Santa Clara versus us? Okay. Yes.
So I think one of the things that can be seen from this chart right here is that we've had the purchase costs, so the big blue bar at the top, were lower in FY19, projected to be slightly lower in FY20. We'll come back to some sense of normalcy in 21, 22, although I will caveat that if we do have a very dry hydro year coming up, we might have to, we might have to take and pull money from the hydro stabilization reserve to help fund and hold against the additional market purchases we would need to make in those cases. So we're also looking at increasing capital investment, which you can see in the orange bar here. Whatever the case, we have our operating
Actually,
reserves.
Can you go back one
Yes,
slide?
sure.
So I also noticed that there's kind of a bump up in operational costs. It's kind of hard to tell because they're all on, the debt service is kind of varying just a little bit, but it looks like, am I looking at it correctly? It looks like the operational cost is also bumping up.
Well, we had a low one in 2019, but we are again going out for additional contracting work in this year and 2021. We're projecting that we're going to have higher costs going forward on operations.
Okay. Yes.
So operating reserves projections for supply and distribution are both projected to, with this plan, are projected to be right at target level through the course of the forecast period. And here you can see I've got a PG&E comparison here, but we're about 34% below PG&E rates. Across the board. If there's any more questions on electric, I could move on to gas.
Well, I can speak to the previous question here. So we haven't finished updating this year's rate comparisons yet, but as of last year, for the largest commercial customers,
Well, bless
Palo Alto was
you.
about 4% higher than Santa Clara.
4% higher, okay.
And I believe the ratio is about the same for mid-sized commercial customers as well, although it looks like in certain ranges. I'm sorry.
You need to repeat.
Let me just repeat what I said. So Jonathan Abendschein, Assistant Director, Utility Resource Management. I would say that, we haven't updated our rate comparisons for this year, but last year, for the largest customers, Palo Alto was about, a little under 5% higher than Santa Clara. For mid-sized customers, roughly comparable, and then for small commercial, a little bit above. I'd have to run the numbers here, pull these numbers out.
Okay, that makes
And
sense.
before you complete that thought, Jonathan, could you take a swag, or maybe you have better than a
Sure.
swag sense of how much of our rates are consisted of the TAC rates, basically the regional, the grid costs
Yeah,
for
about
us versus Santa Clara?
15% of our costs, and with Santa Clara having, I think you're getting to an important point there, that Santa Clara has some in-town generation. So they have a gas plant in town that helps them avoid some of those transmission charges.
Yeah, I guess I mean, this would explain why HP moved their data center, because 5%, because the margins on the data center are not massive, and so 5% of the biggest cost of your data center is going to make a big difference.
Right.
So I mean, that's a good motivation to move.
Right.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay. Moving to the gas utility. Again, the major story here is increased needs for infrastructure, higher infrastructure needs and costs, and for distribution. We're looking at a 5% overall rate increase this year on the gas supply side. It turns out to be like about an 8 or 9% distribution rate increase, but at the end of the day, as only 2/3 of the costs or of the rate is related to distribution, it ends up being about a 5% overall rate increase. Again, you can see that about 30 to 40% of our gas utility cost structure is the blue pieces of pie. That's gas supply. And all of that is actually market pass-through. So gas supply, the commodity section, we change that every single month based upon what PG&E Citygate price is. The environmental and transmission costs, again, those are also pass-through rates depending on what the market cost for those products are. And really what we have control of to change tonight are the costs or the rates related to covering the distribution and capital investment portions. So gas supply is, of course, the most volatile element. The last couple of years, it's been relatively stable, though, and the last couple of months have been some of the lowest gas prices that we've seen in a long time, which has been pleasant. Gas transmission rates, PG&E continues to need to fund their safety as well, so they've been increasing their rates over time. Cap and trade and carbon neutral gas plan, we pass those costs through depending on the cost of allowances or offsets that we buy at market.
And I think one of the things I heard earlier today is the amount of gas used is about the same residential as business? Sort of equal? Did you say that? Yeah.
Yeah. For especially small commercial, yeah. In fact, you could even have yes, that's correct. Gas distribution cost drivers, same. Labor costs, salaries and benefits, underground construction. Here we also have the one item that's a bit different is that we've had a cross-borne investigation program going on. It started, actually, I think this year, is going on for another year or two. It's going to be about between $2.5 to $3 million total to cover, although if we find problems when investigating so let me back up. For those of you who don't know, the gas cross-bores occur when directional boring underground happens to go through another utility line, namely sewer, and we don't want to have situations where gas pipes go through sewer lines. So we're going through video inspecting and checking to make sure those situations are not taking place. And the video scoping it takes time. We find a lot of places with the roots and whatnot, and we need to. It takes more time. So we have $2.5 million set aside to do the initial round of inspections, but it might cost more longer term, depending on what sort of repairs or further inspections are needed. Here, about 3/5 of the total rate increase is related to future CIP investment increases, and about 2/5 related to O&M. And here you see that revenues are roughly matching costs going forward, although drawing your eye here to the sort of the sawtooth pattern that we have going on with the orange. This is something that was determined last year. We're doing a larger main replacement project every other year in the gas, water, and wastewater funds, mainly to see if we can get better bid costs on those projects and get economies of scale and get better bids. In the past, we've seen some quite high prices coming our way. So the revenue line will kind of skirt right through the middle of it. In years where we have, where costs are not at the revenue line, we'll take those additional revenues, push them through to the CIP reserve and use that to then fund the following year's capital investment. Over the long term, we're going to do something slightly different, and Lisa Ballou will be talking a little bit about that in the water fund. We've got a slightly a different path of doing an annualized funding amount for water to the CIP, and then having all CIP transactions come out of the CIP reserve instead, so make the operations reserve a little more stable over time. Again, we're having the gas operations reserve projections, or that we're going to end up right about at target level over the course of the 5-year period.
Go back to slide 23.
23? Yes.
So I noticed that compared to electricity or electric rate on page 13, that operational cost is like much higher percentage of the increase versus the electric rate. Like, if you just compare these two charts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the dark blue we have no control over. Well, we have some control, but we have to do our CIP and the electric supply. It is what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the one lever we do have control over is the operating cost, right? And I guess this, this chunk of the pie is this looks like it's about 40%, and this chunk of the pie is maybe like 10%, right, or 15% or something like that. It's hard to say. It doesn't actually have percentages on there, so I can't tell. But why is it on the gas side the operating expense driving so much more of the rate increase versus on the electric side? What's the cause of that? All right, so maybe just for these two, if you flip back to page 13 and 23, you could see them in comparison. This is like, so it's like, so if you guys look at this, like it's, I don't know, what is that, 13, 15%, 10%? I don't know. If you look at the orange.
The 2% increase, though.
Yeah, 2% increase.
Yeah.
And then you look at the other one.
The portion of the increase.
It's just a portion of the,
That's right, that's right, yeah. So what's interesting,
Yeah, I mean, so the pie is a representation of the proportion of the increase,
Yeah.
not necessarily, so it's
No.
not like a same dollar amount, it's a relative
no,
portion.
I know that, but it just, because to me, it would be, smaller the operating expense, the better, right, in general, in terms of the increase, right? So I guess why on the gas side is this operating cost so much higher than the operating cost increase on the electric side?
So if you look at so here, probably better to show this. If you look at how much operations costs are for the electric fund, it's a much smaller relative level of cost than when you head to the gas side. The operations cost is a much larger percentage overall cost for this fund.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that makes sense. But then the question is, why is operation cost so much higher
Oh,
versus electric? Well,
In terms of the pie, it's because the supply is not a part of the gas rate.
Mhm.
You can see that the supply costs are 50% of the electric rate.
And they're a
But they're-
much smaller share of the gas rate because gas supply costs as a percentage of total
No,
cost.
I get that, but I guess, so what is and I actually, our city manager should know this stuff cold, given the background. So this is almost a little bit over $10 million, right? And then on electricity, it's about almost 20 million, right?
It
I see,
just
okay.
it just costs a
Yeah,
lot
it
more to
costs
supply a unit
for
of electricity
electricity.
than
Okay,
to
that
supply
makes
a
sense.
unit of gas. It's
Okay.
just a simpler commodity
Yeah,
gas.
no, it makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And the final slide I had here was a monthly bill comparison for gas. We're about 8% below PG&E on a calendar year average. Our summer bills are slightly higher than PG&E's, but our winter bills are much lower. And part of that is due to the fact that we have a fixed charge here in Palo Alto, whereas PG&E does not, so. Yeah.
So we compare ourselves with PG&E rather than Santa Clara.
Well, when it comes to gas, there really isn't any other, there's no other utilities to compare against unless you go north to Susanville or south to Long Beach.
But
So,
meaning on a general, as I go through this report, you primarily compared us with PG&E.
for these charts, yes, I just did PG&E, although we do, when we bring the gas and electric financial plans, we have comparison against.
It's probably the most realistic anyway, because it's far more available to our surrounding communities than certainly Santa Clara is.
In gas, we really only compare against PG&E, but when we do the electric, we will also have Santa Clara in there as well as a comparison metric, so.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of riff off what Councilmember Niss just said, I mean, I guess in some cases we can't compare against anyone else but PG&E, I suppose. But to me, it's kind of like an unfair comparison because we own our utilities, right? PG&E is a separate entity, right? It's not owned by San Jose, as an example. And so the analogy would be a renter who rents a house versus an owner who buys a house, right? The owner who buys a house puts in a ton of capital. Thus, the ongoing cost to live in the house is much, much lower than a renter for the equivalent house, right? Because a renter is not sinking a bunch of capital to buy that house. They're just renting it. So thus, they have to pay a higher fee. So to me, the one thing that kind of bothers me about using PG&E is that we are comparing our rates against, like we're like a homeowner because we own our own utilities. We sunk a ton of hundreds of millions of dollars in our maybe even billions, I don't know, like a ton of money in our, having our own utilities, versus other cities which are just renting it. And thus, theoretically, they should have a higher rate because they are renting it. They haven't sunk in the immense amount of capital that we have as a city. So I mean, I think Councilmember Niss has a good point here in that well, maybe for gas we don't have the choice, but for electricity or other ones where we do have a choice, it really would be better to compare a homeowner versus homeowner, right? Versus a homeowner versus a renter, right? Because, like, I own my own house. If I compare it to, let's say, my neighbor who's renting their house across the street from me, I mean, their monthly bill's gonna be a lot higher than my mortgage, but then I put millions of dollars into my house as a base, right? So it's not a fair comparison. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Well,
to you
it's
guys?
not to get into the sort of the ideological or philosophical debate, but I think to follow that logic, a renter is not responsible for maintenance of the house, typically, and the owner is. And so as an owner, the operating expense that you cited earlier is exactly what is a driving factor in our rate.
No, I hear what you're saying. I guess just if you think about it from a financial point of view, right? If you rent a car versus own a car, or buy a house versus rent a house, if you had to pay the same monthly cost after you bought a house as you would have renting, who the hell would buy a house? Just go rent it, right? Or vice versa, right? I mean, so generally there's a cost of capital, and it's worth something, right? I mean, the money is worth something, right? So sinking in, $1 million into your house is worth something. So theoretically, the monthly cost should not be higher owning a house than renting. Now, maybe it isn't because maybe the market's distorted, but in general, if it is, who would want to buy a house?
So Chair Tanaka, I can sympathize with that sort of framing. I think it's important to remember that these aren't necessarily apples to apples comparisons. One of the things, decades ago, we used to actually peg to PG&E. I mean, we're talking like the 70s here. We used to peg to PG&E and make sure we were, a few percentage points below. The issue we started running into was that organization stopped maintaining their system the way that they needed to maintain. And so for a long time, we actually were above PG&E rates because we were maintaining a safe, reliable gas system.
And that means a lot. I mean, they had the wildfires, so I get all that. But
And they're starting to catch up now.
Yeah,
which is
and
why
also
we're
it's not a fair
comparable.
comparison because we're taking money out of our utilities and going to our general fund, right? And PG&E is not taking money out of their utilities and giving it to San Jose, right? So that's also, I mean, it's apples to apples comparison. It's not a fair comparison. So I get all that. That's why PG&E is not a great example because of that. And also, maybe we should factor in the fact that we're taking money out of our utilities into our general fund. Because that's That means, in effect, our taxpayers are getting less taxes because of that. So that is another way to think about it. In some ways, that is a lower utility rate because it's going straight to our general fund. So that's a good point.
Councilmember, I really don't think it's fair to put the staff in the position of needing to justify the policy decisions ultimately of the council. So
Oh,
I think
no.
they're describing the rates and the basis for the rates and providing what has, on an annual basis, been the way that council has asked the staff to do comparisons, which is, what does it look like from the consumer's perspective? And again, we've kind of gone down this path of fair versus unfair. And I think it's really not appropriate to ask staff to opine on fairness.
Okay. I don't have to opine on fairness, but I would say we should compare against other city-owned utilities as a policy.
Thank you. And with that, I'll hand it over to Lisa Blair to discuss wastewater collection and water.
Sorry. Good evening, Lisa Belier, Acting Senior Resource Planner, and I'll talk about wastewater and water. For wastewater, the proposal is for 5% overall rate increase. Part of the reason for this increase is to fund replacement of plant equipment that has been in service for 40 years or more, so that the city can continue to provide wastewater treatment safely and in compliance with regulatory requirements 24 hours a day. The other reason for the rate increase needed is increases in collection costs, both on the capital and operations side. I wanted to also bring to your attention that we are working on a cost of service study currently with an outside consultant, and we'll be bringing the results of that study to you in April. But it may affect the overall bill impact for different customer classes. So approximately 60% of the costs of the wastewater collection utility are for treatment and 40% for collections, the collection system. The wastewater treatment plant has 5 partners, and the utilities department manages the collection system, and the rest of this presentation is primarily about the collection system. However, just to give a little bit of background for the treatment cost drivers, the long-range facilities plan was completed in 2012, and it identified several different facilities that need to be replaced or rehabilitated, and some of them are listed here. And then on the capital side, on the collection side for operations and capital cost drivers, some of the same items that Eric listed earlier appear also for the wastewater utility. One thing to note is that there's also a 2-year main replacement cycle in the wastewater utility, and 2021, which is the primary year that we're talking about for tonight, is actually a lower budget year, but we need to be preparing for the higher CIP year of 2022. This is a comparison with the neighboring communities, and some of these communities also use the regional water quality control plant, and some of them have their own other facilities. Palo Alto is about 26% below the comparison city average for these particular communities. And this is for residential customers. For commercial and restaurant customers, the comparison is a little bit less favorable. Palo Alto is a little bit higher for commercial and comparable for restaurant.
How much higher?
It's about 11% higher for commercial. I think it's 11.
This number is,
So,
what is the number? What is
so which number, the neighboring community average
Menlo
here?
Park, Redwood City, is this a per year, per something?
Oh, I'm sorry, this is the median monthly residential bill.
Okay.
And
the
it should say that it's in
median
dollars. Yes, yes.
So,
So this is the residential, yeah.
so for Menlo Park and Redwood City, do they own their own wastewater treatment plant, or is it through a third party?
I don't know about the ownership. I think Redwood City is the owner of that regional facility, perhaps.
Phil
maybe
will
Phil,
always know those
Phil,
answers.
Phil can answer. Thank you.
Redwood City doesn't actually own it. They're part of Phil Boble, Public Works. So Redwood City is part of this next sewage treatment plant north now called Silicon Valley Clean Water, dump. And there's about 7 cities that are part of a joint powers authority. And Redwood City is part of that.
So they don't own it, but how about Menlo Park?
Menlo Park's the same.
Okay.
Menlo Park's a little more complicated, but they feed into that same sewage treatment plant.
And by that logic, the same applies to us, in fact, as it relates to the regional nature of our what we refer to as our facility.
Well, I mean, I guess to me, because this sits on Palo Alto land, is that right? The wastewater treatment plant?
It's on land owned by Palo Alto, yes.
Okay, so it's pretty big. I've been there before, actually. It's a pretty big piece of land, as I recall. It's how many acres?
25.
25 acres, yeah. So it's pretty large. And while this is jointly owned, we're using our land for this resource. So I guess, just to me, we should have a lower rate because we're using a lot of our capitals tied up, our assets tied up on the land that we're using for this purpose. So to me, I would expect to have a lower rate as a result because we made that investment. I guess Menlo Park and Redwood City makes sense that they would be higher given that they don't own their wastewater. So that makes sense. So thank you. Sorry, why don't you just keep going?
Right, so this slide shows the percentage, the breakdown of the 5% overall rate increase and some of the drivers for that increase. As you can see, approximately half of it is due to treatment cost increases and approximately half of it is due to collection cost increases, both on the O&M and CIP cost side. And then looking at the wastewater projections, you can see the stacked bar charts showing the costs and then the revenue in the red line. And for 2021, the revenue is a little bit higher than the costs, but again, this is because of the alternate year, the 2-year main replacement cycle. And if you look at 2022, the revenue is below the total costs. So we need to, on average, recover the amount of capital needed for the collection system.
Question for you. So on this chart, I noticed that the treatment operations seems to be having a fairly strong trendward upward. I guess the collection, it's a little bit hard to tell, but the collection operations also looks like it's also trending upward, right? Now, of course, you have the collection capital that's kind of alternating, but the operations, I guess, what's causing the kind of the strong trend upwards for both operations?
So for operations, we've relied upon the assumptions from the long-term financial forecast, so that those escalation numbers, as well as some additional increases in rent and salaries and benefits.
Rent, but it's our own land, right?
So I'm just speaking to the collection operations cost increases.
Oh.
And I don't know if Phil wants to talk about if you have any comment about the treatment operations increases?
It's primarily salary and benefit driven.
I see. Okay, that would make sense. And it looks like it's well above inflation. Am I looking at this wrong? There's no real numbers here, so it's hard to tell, but it looks like it's well above inflation.
Chemical costs and other compliance costs. Katie's talked about those in the past.
Yes, but I think if we actually had the numbers in front of us, you'd see it's not really above inflation. It's the 3% range.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard to tell because it goes from, in 2019, maybe about $7-8 million. And if you look at the out years, it's way past 10. So, but again, there's no hard numbers. I'm just eyeballing on the graph here.
So the other thing that happens is there is a little bit of a discontinuity between the projected and the actual numbers in that we don't always spend the entire budget, and we try to have an allowance for unspent budget in there, but, you know, there's not always an exact match from the actuals to the projected.
From the other ones that you guys have in here, I noticed that there's not that kind of, at least I didn't notice it, it's that kind of operating cost increase, although it's kind of hard to tell because sometimes where it's on the graph, it's hard to figure out, but it doesn't seem like there's as pronounced of a operation cost increase.
You know, I do
Councilmember
have
Tanaka, if I could just add, another major factor in that is our utility costs. And so they are, as you're learning tonight, more like on the order of 5%, generally speaking, and that's what we've assumed going forward here. So we've typically assumed 3% for salary and benefits, but more like 5% for utility costs. And we're a major user of electricity at the plant.
I see, okay.
If it would be helpful, I have a separate chart that shows a longer-term increase in both the treatment operations and collection operations costs.
I guess what would be really neat to have is a chart that shows, and maybe you already have this, a chart that shows the operational increase of all different ones right next to each other, right, year by year. So we could see, are some getting outlined versus others? And maybe, as Phil said, maybe because the wastewater is driven by electricity and electricity rates are going up, maybe that's going to increase the cost, right? So that would be interesting. But I guess the most important part, this is the part that we can't really control cost of electricity. Well, we can kind of, but the thing that's probably most important is the cost of our labor, right? How does the labor cost look like? And how much of this is driving that trend upward, right? Because the other ones don't have this as pronounced of a trend upward as this one does. So that's the part that, to me, looks a little bit concerning.
Okay.
Now, the good news is that it's shared among all of our partners, right? But the bad news is still going up, right?
This is the Palo Alto collection utility
But
costs.
it's shared evenly across all the cities, right? According to usage.
Right.
Yeah, so it's still, yeah, okay.
Okay.
But do you guys have a chart somewhere to back up about comparing?
I don't have it year by year. I just have it over the long-term time trend. Would you like to see that? Or
I would like to see a chart that shows the labor cost for all three of these and see how that's driving the operational cost increasing.
Okay, we can try to bring that with us.
Because the capital cost, you gotta invest in the infrastructure, so that makes total sense. There's the baseline commodity costs, right? Be it, the power you have to buy, the water you have to buy, the gas you have to buy, the chemicals you have to buy to treat the stuff. That's all, you have to do that. But the one lever we do have is the labor cost.
Okay.
Right? And so I think focusing on that, that's the most important, because everything else we really don't have choice on, right? We have to do what we have to do. Right?
Okay. And this last chart for wastewater shows the operations reserve level, and it does decline during the years 22 through 24, but then starts coming back up to the target level by 2025. So within the whole time period, it's within the guideline range. So moving on to the water utility. There's no rate increase proposed in 2021, and however, there is a lot of CIP work going on in 2021 and 2020 to rehabilitate or replace aging infrastructure, and to work to make the system seismically sound and resilient in order to continue to provide the high-quality water to Palo Alto businesses and residents.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
All our water is Hetch-Hetchy, isn't it?
Yes, all our potable water is Hetch-Hetchy,
Okay.
and then there's a portion of water that's recycled water.
Right,
But that people are not drinking it. Yeah.
Hetch Hetchy.
It's
Okay.
all Hetch Hetchy. So much of the CIP work going on in 2020 and some in 2021 has been previously budgeted for, and so funds to fund those projects are available in reserves. Some of the projects are available in reserves. Our water supplier, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, has been doing the same thing. They're doing a lot of CIP work to try to make their system seismically sound and to rehabilitate their aging infrastructure.
And we're helping support that.
Yes, and it's been a benefit to Palo Alto to be able to have, more seismically stable system serving the water.
It's worth it because I like the water.
Yes. However, within this time frame, there are a series of large rate increases coming from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. They are forecasting that they will hold their rates constant this year, no rate increase in 2021 and in 2022, but in 23, there begins a series of large rate increases. So part of this plan is to plan for that by using the rate stabilization reserve to mitigate those large rate increases down the road. And then the other thing is that I wanted to bring up to your attention is with the 2-year replacement cycle of main replacements, we want to make a steady contribution to the CIP reserve in order to, in the same way that a general fund departments would make a contribution to the central CIP fund. And then by using the CIP reserve in this way in the water utility, and then hopefully also in the wastewater utility when we bring you the final proposals, it will help to make sure that rates are stable. It will help to make sure that the CIP funds are available when they're needed, and then to also provide a more clear picture for decision-making so you can see more realistically what's happening in the fund in the long term. So.
But we really haven't had much choice, have we, as far as dealing with the PUC? I mean, we might like to think we do, but it's really sort of their game, and as I said, we're lucky, I think, still to get water that has such quality.
That's true. Okay. Looking at the cost structure for the water utility, it's about half supply cost, so half going to pay for the San Francisco water, and about half to distribute water within our own system in Palo Alto. This is just showing you that we already talked about, that all of Palo Alto's potable water comes from Hetch Hetchy, the Hetch Hetchy system. And then, as we also mentioned already, that SFPUC is at the later stages of a very large program to rehabilitate pipelines, and with the goal of being able to return to service within 24 hours after an earthquake. And although a lot of the work is complete, costs have been driven upwards and are going to continue to be driven upward as a result of this program and other necessary work that San Francisco is conducting. On the Palo Alto collection system side, I wanted to mention a few of the drivers that you've seen for other utilities and then draw your attention to the middle item here. The installation of backup generators at pumping stations will occur during this time period and will be a significant increase to the operations costs in the water utility. This is a view of the bill comparisons with the same comparison group. And you can see that Palo Alto, for residential customers, the average bills, the different color bars show usage at different levels. So the red bars show kind of a medium level of usage of 8 CCF. And at that 8 CCF per month of usage, Palo Alto's bills are higher than the neighboring communities. They are not the highest of the communities. You can see that Redwood City and Menlo Park a little bit higher.
So do they own their own water utilities?
The ones on here that don't own their own water utilities is Menlo Park and Los Altos. Those are districts of California Water Service Company.
But they're still on the Hetch Hetchy system?
Not Los Altos. So this is a group.
I do know they have their own, but all the rest
And,
of, well.
and some of the other
anything
ones.
North does, correct?
Well, some of the other ones have a portion from Hetch Hetchy, but not all from Hetch Hetchy. So like Santa Clara has some from Hetch Hetchy, and Mountain View has a small portion from other sources.
If you head into San Mateo County, up to San Francisco, aren't those all Hetch Hetchy or not? You know,
I
as you
think
go up
mostly, but
through the
I
county.
couldn't answer that. I think there's groundwater, but mostly.
Mostly, I would
Mhm.
think, I don't know where else they get their water, right?
Mhm.
But Los Altos, I know, has their own system called Purissima, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, feel free to jump in. Okay, so on this slide, the one city that has higher rates doesn't own the utilities. And there's one other city that doesn't own the utilities has lower rates. So it looks like we have like systemically higher water bills compared to everyone else. So what do you guys think
Yes.
is the cause of that?
Yes, and I should have said, I wanted to point out that the rates have been getting closer over time to the neighboring cities. So, and then also I wanted to say that we are working on a study to look at the reasons for Palo Alto's rates being higher in the water utility. We're just not quite ready to bring you the results of that study, but we've been taking a close look at the cost, different cost breakdowns and different characteristics of the different utilities in order to try to bring you that information.
Okay, great. I'm glad you're working on it.
I think one of the clear factors that comes up regularly, though, is that we do substantially more capital investment than most of the other water utilities in the area. I mean, sometimes, most of the other utilities are on a 200-year replacement cycle, and pipe doesn't last that long. So we're on a sustainable 80 to 100-year replacement cycle, and we've been doing that for about 20 years. It's dropped our leak rate by about 50%. So I think responsible infrastructure stewardship is definitely a piece of the
So
story.
you're trying to imply that other cities are not responsible right now in their capital improvements?
He did not say that.
I did not say that. I'm saying that Palo Alto does have very responsible stewardship of its infrastructure, and so.
Well, I think the quick way is to break down the capital versus operating expense, and then you can kind of see how that flushes out. But okay, yeah, I know it's work in progress. So yeah, I'm glad you guys are ahead of it.
Okay. So then what this shows in this chart, you've seen this chart several times for the different utilities, and you can see that in the orange capital cost bars at the top, that they become very steady in this utility starting in 2022. And that's because they're reflecting that annual contribution to the CIP reserve, which is enough to fund that CIP. There also, those orange bars show a slight increase in 2020 and 2021, and that's due to some proposed one-time transfers from the operations reserve to the capital reserve in order to fund one-time CIP projects that are necessary for seismic, to make the reservoirs seismically sound. And so then you can see the nice slow and steady increase in revenue and the rate increases being held to a more moderate level because the funds that are in that CIP reserve are going to help, and the funds that are in the rate stabilization reserve are going to help to moderate the rate increases going forward in the 5-year plan.
So I noticed that on this one and on the wastewater, we don't transfer money out like we do for the other ones. Does anyone know why we don't transfer money out from our utilities for the other ones, like for this one and the other one, to our general fund? What was the historical? Again, it's probably one of the prior council that made the decision, but I was just curious what was the rationale behind that.
Yeah, I mean,
Does anyone have personal knowledge of the time the transition happened? This was done many years ago.
this was before our time. Maybe we want to go back and look at that history and.
Yeah, it's not a big. I was just curious because the thing that kind of was really kind of curious to me is for the one area we don't, or for one of the areas that we don't treat with transfer, right? We actually have higher water rates, right? Because if we actually were doing transfers out of this, and we had higher water rates, okay, then you kind of make sense because we're taking money for a general fund. But this is one where we're not doing that, and yet we have higher water rates. Oops. We have higher water rates, so that was kind of interesting. Okay, great. I think this is kind of a study session because
It is, it
yeah,
says review.
yeah, it says action item up here, but it's actually
It's really not.
yeah, it's really not. It's just review. So just wanted to give my colleagues a chance to, ask any other questions, give any feedback, comments. No? Okay. So I'll give just kind of like a really quick wrap up here. So so a few suggestions, and these are kind of like high level suggestions. One is I would divide up what we can control versus what we can't control. So, the cost of the commodity, a capital is something we could capital investment is something we could kind of control. But I would almost like, well, this is a good example. So, if you look at this chart versus like the wastewater versus electricity versus the, gas, you guys stack them all differently every single time. And so it's kind of hard. One thing is you could be consistent. That makes it easier for people to follow. And what I would recommend is put the part that we cannot control on top. So like the water supply, we have to buy the water. We're not creating the water ourselves here, so it's going to cost a certain amount of money, right? So that should just go on top because we really can't do much about it, right? What we can control are operations. That's mainly our labor, right? That should be on the bottom because that's the one now we can control. And that way, baseline across the zero axis, it's easy for us to see, is it going up or down, right? And then maybe put the you can put the capital cost on top or something. But some other things like the debt service, we have to pay our debt service, right? The transfers, well, we need the money in our general funds. We're going to keep doing those no matter what. So just to make this thing easy to understand, right? So that it's clear as to what's going on and what's driving for us to understand what's driving these rate increases, right? Because when every single chart, the bars are all different, and you can't have a solid basis to compare stuff. You just have to eyeball it. It makes it tough. Okay, so I think you guys get that. And I would especially say the labor cost. That's maybe you almost want to divide that out. Like, how much of the labor cost is driving this? I think because that's something we can't control. Almost everything else we cannot. The second thing is, and I kind of said this already, but basically better comparable. So I think we should compare ourselves to other cities that have also made a massive investment in their utilities, like we have, and own our own utilities. And I don't think it's quite a fair comparison when people are basically renting their utilities versus owning like ours. So I think, first of all, I got to commend you for having comparisons, because that's something which you guys haven't always done. So I think it's great that you have comparisons, but I think having fairer comparisons might be better. And then the last thing is, I was looking at, can you go to slide 3. So I was looking at a very similar chart from a couple years ago, and the thing that I found really interesting is that if you look at like this equivalent slide from 2020, 2019, 2018, is on the out years, the rates tend to be lower than what it is right now. So as an example, if you look at 2021, it's, you can see it's 5%, 5%, 0.00. But then if you look at like what our forecast was in 2019, okay, I know you don't have it, but I have it right here. So if you look at it, maybe I'll make it brighter so you guys could see it. It's like, we forecast in 2021 to be a 2% increase, right? And now, actually, wait, sorry, this is still 2%. Which one I was looking at?
What are you trying to get at?
Yeah, just for difference in forecast. Yeah, difference in forecast. Yeah. So I guess that's the last part would be interesting to see how the forecast changed, right, from what it was the prior year, right? So that's my. You guys could do that on your own, so we don't have to spend time on that. But anyways, so that's the only part I thought would be interesting. Okay, otherwise, I really like what you guys did here. I looked at this before, and there wasn't a lot of nice, pretty charts, so I thought what you guys did in the presentation was really nice. So thank you for your work. And I think we are done on this, right?
It's time to go find out who's going to run the country, don't you think?
Well, I'm not sure we're going to know quite yet. So I think we have one last thing here is future meeting and agendas. So let's see. Do we have a piece of paper in here on that?
You canceled
Correct.
the next one, right?
Correct. So the next meeting on March 17th, in working with the chair, has been canceled. And that means the next time we will meet will be April 7th. And at that April 7th meeting, we'll be looking at tentatively the second quarter financial report for fiscal year 2020. And you will have this utilities team coming back to talk with you about the final water and wastewater collection utility plans, including the full, rate impact studies with the financial plans, et cetera. After that, the next meeting would be April 21st, which tentatively has both the CDBG grant allocation that has to be done annually by this finance committee, and will go to council in May, as well as the retiree healthcare plan and actuarial contributions that are done biannually by our consultants, Bartel and Associates. So April 7th and April 21st tentatively do have
Will you send us
agendas.
calendar savers on those?
Yeah,
You
I'll
should have calendar savers on all of these right now, and as agendas become more solidified, we will update the calendar invites with the agenda plan.
So kind of the thing that I'm trying to do with staff is try to consolidate these meetings so that we use our time wisely. So if there's just one 20-minute item, I try to move it to a time when we could kind of.
There are no 20-minute items.
Well, there was going to be just one, I think just number 2. So it would have been maybe a shorter meeting. So anyways, we're trying to consolidate it so that we don't have to meet as often, and we could just kind of do it all at once. So that's what I'm trying to do, make it a little bit more efficient with people's time. Let's see. The other thing is we set up a thing where I'm trying to sync up with staff right after this meeting to talk about the next meeting. So, after this meeting, we'll send out a little bit more updates on when the exact meeting times are.
Okay.
Yep. And
Not tonight.
no, not no more meetings tonight. And let's see. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you. Okay, I think we're adjourned. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.